The topic for this video is properties of multiplication. And the first one we're going to look at is the identity property. And that identity property says that if you take a number and you multiply it by 1, you always get that number's identity. In other words, you always get that number's name. And that works for every number, whether it's positive or negative. However, the only number it actually doesn't work for is 0, and that's why we have the 0 property, because when you multiply a number by 0, you get 0. The associative property is a grouping property, and it says when you have multiple numbers, like 3 times 4 times 5, and you're multiplying them all together, it doesn't matter if you choose to group the 3 times 4 and do that first, that would be 12, and then times 5 would be 60, or if you choose to group the 4 times 5 first, which would be 20, and then multiplying by 3 is 60. So it's a grouping property. When you have multiple numbers multiplied together, it doesn't matter how you choose to group them. Our last one is the commutative property, and it says when you multiply something like 3 times 4, it's exactly the same thing as multiplying 4 times 3. It's basically turnaround facts. So if you turn an array around a 3 by 4 array, it becomes a 4 by 3 array, but there's still the same amount of x's or counters in your array. So let's look at a few examples of how we can identify these properties. Problem A, right off the bat, I can tell that this is going to be the associative property. And the reason I know that is because I see grouping, and it looks like we have 2 times 6 times 7. Over here should be 2 times 6 times 7. And all we did was we grouped it differently. We did 6 times 7 on the left, and we did 2 times 6 on the right. Problem B, 3 times what is 3? Well, that would be 1, so that is the identity property. C is 6 times 0 is, of course, 0. That is the 0 property. And problem D says 9 times 6 is the same thing as 6 times 9. That is turnaround facts, which is the commutative property. Commutative property. And here's one more set of examples. A, 9 times 0 is, of course, 0. That's the 0 property. It says when you multiply a number by 0, you always get 0. B, what times 5 is 5? So that would be 1. That is the identity property. And problem C, looks like it's the associative property. Just be careful when you're doing this. If it's the associative property, you need to make sure that the operations are all the same. In this case, they're both multiplication and they're multiplication here. If we had like an addition problem right here, this would not be the associative property. The associative property of multiplication says when you are multiplying multiple numbers, and that's all you're doing is multiplying multiple numbers, you can group them differently. But it does not let you work with multiple operations. So it looks like we're missing a 3 right here, and we did just group it differently. And the last one, 3 times 9 is 9 times 3. That is the commutative property.